Hey, Ronin man here in Lumpini Park in Bangkok, Thailand. I wanted to do a shout out with this video, a quick shout out to Cassie Jaye. I just watched the interview, and I'm going to post it below, of post-screening of her movie, The Red Pill. And it's really great. You should definitely watch it. And it's so instructive on many levels. And I want to go into it in this video. Why it's very frustrating too. Like, watching this video is incredibly frustrating. And I watched it several times and I couldn't quite, I saw the movie, I saw all the other interviews of you, and I was super impressed. I mean, I'm like beyond impressed, because I personally have also had experience making TV, making documentaries, shooting all kinds of things. I've been involved, I've been on TV a lot, and I'm not a TV star, but just long story, my personal history is long story, but I've been involved on TV, and what that has taught me is that most TV is so fake. It's so set up, right? And your movie is so obviously real. It's so real, I can feel it in my bones, because the transformation that you had to go through from a feminist to somebody who is not a feminist is so, it takes a long time to do that. Like, even if you wanted to fake the movie, even if you were a complete fake and you said, hey, I'm going to make a movie where I start as a feminist and I'm going to become not a feminist and it's going to be super controversial, even if you wanted to do that, I don't believe you would have been capable of doing it. I honestly don't think there's any way you could have done it. And if you watch the reaction of the crowd and also of the audience, or sorry, the speaker, the one speaker who's a feminist on the right, the woman, I forget her name, but obviously everybody else can watch the link below. But if you watch her reaction, it's very frustrating to watch her, and it's actually very instructive, because she is going through the process that you went through over 2 years. Now, obviously, you can't go through the whole process in a short period of time, but she's kind of somewhat going through it, right? I think her first thing is like exasperation, like, I can't believe we're talking about this. Like, this is so obvious, that life is this way, and then she's like, oh, but I can't say that because all these people are here. Like, everybody's here to watch this movie, and we just watched this movie, and it was about men having feelings and men having difficulty and feminism not being such a great thing. And she's like tongue-tied and confused, you can tell. But she's very emotional and jumping up and down and taking the mic. So I don't want to bag on her, but I just want to say that her reaction is really, if you watch the interview again, just watch her reaction, and you'll learn more about the process that every feminist, men or women, has to go through in order to accept your movie. She's going through a process, and I hope that she continues. I hope that this isn't just like a one-time thing where she's like, she makes this interview and then she goes back to her normal everyday thing. And here's what's wrong. Okay, here's what's wrong with everything you've been interviewing people about so far. Okay, the problem is that when you introduce the movie, okay, you say in the beginning, you're like, oh, I made this movie, and then you're on your own. Like, there's every panelist standing there, nobody else made the movie, right? Just you. So you're like, oh, but when I tried to make it, I was shunned by feminist groups. I couldn't raise money. There were the grants were not available once people knew the topic. I was not invited back to places. My reputation was ruined. You kind of said this all very rushed, very hurriedly. And everybody's just kind of like, okay, yeah, this is the process that Cassie went through to make this movie. But I don't think it's so simple myself. I think that part there is the key part of the whole video, because if someone doesn't really grasp the part that you're talking about in that very beginning, they can't get the rest of it. Like, they can't possibly have a reasonable discussion after that. And let me make my point why I think that. Okay, so you were shunned and you were treated, your reputation was actively attacked because you made a movie about men, from men's perspective. That was all that anybody knew. You were making it because in the very beginning, you hadn't even made a movie yet. You're just talking about making a movie. And the very kind of sniff or hint that it's not going to be a feminist perspective and that feminists are not going to control the movie talking about men was enough. Am I right? Is this correct? Because this is what I see. If that is correct, this is something that the interview should start with. The whole group should be, in other words, soul searching for everybody in the audience and for each member of the audience, and sharing from all of the guys should go on for hours on this part. On this very beginning, the fact that you could not make the movie, you were not allowed to make the movie, you were stopped from making the movie, you were disparaged, you were attacked, and then the fact that it's underground and the meeting itself was not allowed by the authorities. You say in the, Paul Elam says, so the thing is that this whole thing is almost like wartime. You're like at war, and at the same time you're trying to do a regular interview. You're not like, I think probably you're undergoing stress traumatic disorder. I think that, and also I think that people aren't really listening to you yet, because it takes time to process these things. Whenever I've gone through something extremely traumatic, it's taken me a long time to, even for myself, I tend to just brush myself off and stand up and think I'm okay. Like, hey, I'm fine, I'm fine. Just had a terrible motorcycle accident. I'm still alive. I'm fine. There's no stress. Nothing's going on with me. I'm totally fine. But the truth is that your whole worldview was turned upside down. There was a group that you were involved in, the feminists, for your whole life, essentially, your whole adult life, and something that you trusted in totally. And one little change, and you are completely out of this group. And you're not just out of this group, but you are attacked ruthlessly by people that you previously trusted. Like writers and magazines and companies and actual like individual people that you knew, because you made a lot of movies before that. You made movies, feminist movies before that, about I think it was LGBT rights. So the shock of this kind of stuff is not to be taken lightly. It's not something that you just like, oh yeah, I believed in something my whole life, and then when I made one little change to it, I was attacked ruthlessly. My reputation was smeared by people that didn't know me in the mass media. People tried to ruin me. People tried to stop my project without even knowing what it was about. I'm not even allowed to screen it. I was almost essentially kicked out of Australia, treated very, very poorly by the Australian media, attacked endlessly in the movie with just visceral attacks, like really, really cutting. And not only that, the questions they ask you aren't even like to the point. So like, for example, the movie ends, right? Now in the movie, there's a lot of very, very touching stories of men who have been screwed over so bad that any like reasonable person would want to cry. Like these guys, the guy committed suicide. There's a lot of stuff in there, very, very heavy emotional stuff. But what I noticed is whenever you're doing the interviews after the movie, I've never heard one person say, and this is so odd. See, so part of figuring out what's going on is figuring out what's not going on. What was not going on was none of the people in the audience asked about any of the guys in the movie. Like, hey, is he okay? Is that guy okay? Or is his family okay? Like, can we make sure that doesn't happen again? Like, I was so shocked to see this. So, for example, if I watch a movie, let's say about India, about the slums of India, the first thing that I want to do, and most people's reaction is to want to give money or support that family that was featured, or that boy or that girl, whoever was featured in the movie, right? It's like there's an immediate sympathy for the people in the movie. They usually get help, they usually get contacted, they get media attention, all kinds of stuff happens to people who are featured in these kind of documentaries. This did not happen in your documentary. Nobody was interested in talking to any of the men that you interviewed. That in itself is very, very weird. Okay, it tells me that the audience is so far behind where you are with your 2-year journey and actually meeting these people in person, that they can't even digest what you're talking about. Like they can't even feel any emotional sympathy for them, because it's like we're not used to thinking about guys as victims. So like, just watching this movie, the audience is just not ready for it. And especially feminists are just like, hey, we know feminism is good. Why don't these guys join the feminist movement? Feminist is equal rights for everybody. And so why don't these guys join the movement? But what you're saying is that the feminist movement, without even knowing what you were talking about, attacked you and tried to destroy you, right? So this is really the story that I want to see you talk about, and I want to see feminists talk about, because we need details. Basically, we need details about who did what, how did they attack you, which grants are usually available and they were not available once they found out the topic was not about a feminist perspective on men and women, because these details are key. Knowing that, you know, how easy it was for you to make the movies about feminism, and how much help you got, and how they got screened on college campuses, and how this movie was absolute, you know, opposite. It's like the difference between you know, a diamond ring and a toxic you know, waste dump. I mean, they're not even similar things. I mean, what you were like, people tried to destroy you, tried to stop you, and you carried on. But the thing is, this is essential in the story. It's an essential part of the movie, because, you know, I mean, what the hell? You know what I'm saying? Like this, it's like it's a showstopper here. It's a showstopper. So that's one thing. And nobody cared about any of the people. Nobody really got into deeply about how you were treated and how the movie was treated. Then combine that with the fact that Breitbart did an article on it, and Milo Yiannopoulos, or whatever his name is, he wrote something about it and helped you to get funded. And the movie, I think everybody can agree, once they finally watch the movie, they realize the movie is a beautiful movie. You know, it's a very human movie. It's not at all what it was portrayed to be. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite. I mean, it's a touching story of human beings. And I'm not just talking about for men. I mean, most of my friends and family are both men and women, and they also have men, you know, female and male family members, and they're very concerned with both females and males, right? Life is not, it's not a monoculture, right? So women also are very concerned about this movie, about the way that men are treated, suicide, and the things you brought up are super, super serious. And nobody in the audience said, look, men commit suicide 70% of the time. And it just keeps endlessly getting repeated over and over and over and over, that women commit suicide, supposedly try to commit suicide more. And it's portrayed, and you portrayed it, as men are better at it. Or your audience, sorry, your panel member did. I think this is very incorrect. I don't think that it's a question of skill. And it's not a chance for a man to put their, you know, like pat themselves on the back. It's like, hey, we're good at, you know, suicide. I don't think that's the message. The message is that most of the time, if you talk to anybody who is a suicide counselor, is they're going to tell you that most of the time people, it's just a cry for help. So most people who try to commit suicide are just trying to get attention. They're trying to cry for help. They're having a problem. They don't know how to solve it. And they're, you know, trying to say goodbye because they just don't have any solutions, right? But so if somebody does succeed at suicide, right, that is a very, very different thing than a cry for help, okay? If somebody tries to kill themselves, that means, if somebody kills themselves, I should say, that means that they were serious. It was not a cry for help. It was not a cry for attention. It was, I have no hope. There's no way out of this thing. I must leave. Nobody cares. Nobody will help me. There are no solutions for me. That is the message to somebody who commits suicide. And this is a key thing, is that we're not talking about the skill of suicide. American women are very aware of a thing called a gun, right? And if you put the gun in your mouth and pull the trigger, point it upwards, there's a good chance it's over, right? But what do most people do? They commit suicide in ways that won't really kill them, right? So if I jump off let's say I jump off a 48-story building over a concrete highway, I'm killing myself. That's it. I'm not trying to, get attention, right? So if you wanted to get into the details, you could say, well, for example, if you want to get a little farther, you could say, well, how did women do it, right? Did they jump into a meat grinder? Did they jump off a 48-story building? You know what I mean? Did they put a gun in their mouth and pull the trigger? Is that the way they did it? Because if they didn't do it that way, then which way did they do it? Because this tells you a lot. This tells you a lot, It's like, are they serious or not, right? Like cut their wrists, lay around, drink. That's very different than somebody, obviously, who gets a charcoal briquettes. I know that Japanese guys will take their car in the mountain and they'll have a barbecue inside their car, and they will asphyxiate themselves with very close to 100% success. So this type of behavior is not the same as somebody who is playing around or trying to get attention, right? And I'm not saying that women are, I'm not saying women are not to be taken seriously. If women killed themselves at 70%, I would be saying the same thing about women, right? But in this case, what we're seeing is one group is more of a cry for help. The other group is completely despondent and has no hope and cannot see any way out and is trying to end their lives, right? So this is another thing. This is again and again, I think that the points are being missed. Is that one, you've undergone some major stress, post-traumatic stress. You've been attacked by institutions and people and family and friends that you trusted and you believed in. And you had reason to believe in them because you made a movie before and they all supported it and they were all nice and they helped to fund you and everybody wanted to show the movie. And then when you had the exact opposite, this is not a small thing. This is not like, oh, how interesting that she doesn't now have anybody wanting to help her and they're trying to ruin her life. Like, that's interesting. That is the kind of feeling I got in the interview. Is that like, oh, okay, well, yeah, that's what she had to do to make the movie. No, this is a key part of the movie. This is a key part of the movie, is that the feminist movement does not allow for any other thinking. And when you interview people who aren't feminists, who talk about issues that feminists talk about, this is something that's completely unacceptable. It's just fucking unacceptable to women. You can't do that. It's not cool. This must be stopped, essentially. And if it requires ruining your reputation of an innocent person who was previously a friend of the movement and a friend maybe personally, that's fine. It's that important. We have to destroy her now. We must destroy her. And also there's no, again, this is the kind of thing that you would expect the members in the audience to say, when you said that, for everybody to be outraged, completely outraged. Like, what the hell happened? Who was it? Tell me their name. I want to know who this is. Which magazine is this? I'm never going to read this again. I want to write about this. I want to talk about this. How could anybody do that to you when they didn't even know what the movie was about? What is wrong with them? There's free speech in this country. What is wrong with people? There was none of that. There was just like, oh, okay. And the other thing I noticed was nobody really, they didn't have any sympathy for any of the characters. Nobody asked how they were. Nobody asked how they turned out. Nobody had any kind of questions that I see when, for example, there was that movie about the kids in India, the beggars, and there was a lot of things. There's like Malala in Afghanistan, right? She's invited to speak at the United Nations, and she gets massive press. None of the guys in your movie who were talking about a very important subject that affects half the population were asked to speak anywhere. In fact, even the audience who's interviewing you didn't ask about them. So this is another key thing, because it's one thing if you did your movie and you realize that society is not paying attention to these guys, they don't care. It's another thing if you make a movie and now the movie's out there, now the story's clear the injustice is clear, it's obvious, and then nobody still cares. This is another red flag. This is a very serious thing, and it's not addressed. And I think you should be asking them, like, do you not realize these are human beings in the movie? Let's talk about them. Let's talk about these situations. Do you remember this guy? What was your reaction to this guy? What was your reaction to this? What do you think about this? Do you want to, you know, raise some money to support this guy in this situation? Who's being unfairly this or unfairly that? And the specific guys that are in your movie. Okay? This is the type of thing that should be ground home, because the stories of the guys themselves, if the audience and if the public doesn't have any sympathy for them, there's really nowhere to go, because you featured them, you know. And if they still don't get it, it's like what I saw was the questions they were asking you and the answers they were giving you was almost canned answers, like the same answers that any feminist would give. The woman on the right, you know, there was no recognition that we had just watched a movie about a woman whose life was destroyed by a group that she used to love and be part of, and the movie was about a group of people who were unjustly screwed over endlessly, and nobody cares. There was nothing about that. There was nothing. Every question that they answered was just general men and women stuff. How should men, you know, men and women act? What should a young man do? You know, a young millennial. How should he act in today's world? There was no sympathy. There was nothing for you. There was no offer of counseling for you, because I'm sure you're still going through a lot of stuff. I'm sure you're still like completely like, this whole thing has upended your life in so many ways. And I saw you talk about your boyfriend and the relationship and how it's gotten better. And I thought that was beautiful, because it's obviously very deep, because the different mindset that you got from making the movie allowed you to have improved your relationship. And I don't think that was even like on your radar, obviously, in the beginning. And that's very essential, because there's a lot of people right now with relationship problems. And people are marrying at a lower and lower rate. And if you, as a feminist who went through this process, who saw herself from the outside, who saw the movement from the dark side, essentially the matrix, you saw it from the other side, and you incorporated the lessons you learned, and it improved your relationship. This is pretty important stuff. This is not small stuff. This is like, you know, this is a pretty big deal. I mean, people spend millions of dollars every year on relationship counseling to learn about how to have a better relationship. But no one's asking about that. Nobody asked you about that. I noticed no women in the audience were interested in hearing about how big of a change you had in your relationship since you stopped being a feminist and incorporated a sympathy for men based on the real things that they're going through. Nobody asked about that. That's another interesting thing. That's again, that's another thing, like, it wasn't there that should have been there if these were normal, human, caring people, right? Because everybody's got relationships. They're worried about their relationships, and nobody asked about that. So again, it's another red flag, because, and I think the reason is because nobody wants to hear the answer that you're going to say, because nobody wants to know that they're wrong. Nobody wants to know that feminism is not helping relationships, and that it's essentially, I don't want to say what it is. I'll leave the audience for that one. It's too heavy to really encapsulate. But we're seeing a bully organization that is trying to ruin your life for trying to make a movie about people's pain. This is just not, it's not the organization that a lot of people thought it was, right? I think it's very similar to like when a Catholic person who's a good Catholic, and they find out that their son was molested, and let's stop using molest in these general words. His son was forced to give a blowjob and got fucked in the ass by a priest, right? You know, his dick went into his son's ass, like, and his son was straight. I mean, this is the type of stuff that causes people not to be a Catholic anymore, because it's so jarring to find out that this group that you trusted so much not only isn't what you thought it was, but is almost the exact opposite. You know, that I think it's the same kind of process that people are going to have to go through, as they did when the Catholic sex scandals all broke. Is that people were like, you know what I mean? Like going from like, this is the best group and the best people, to like, wait a second, this is like the worst thing that's ever happened to my son. Like nothing has ever, you know what I mean? Nothing this bad has ever happened to my son. And it happened through the Catholic Church. And that took this, I think, the community a long time to process. And now we're seeing massive drop in enrollment, or whatever you call it, attendance at churches, at Catholic churches. And you're seeing a lot of Catholic churches go bankrupt because of the realization that took them so long to get to, which is that the organization they thought was one thing, not only is not that, but it is kind of the exact opposite for them. Okay, I'm not going to say it all is, because obviously it depends on the person, but anybody that would cover up something this bad has to be looked at. And I think that's the kind of same kind of thing we're looking at with the feminist movement. So I guess that's the equivalency. I can't even think of the word. Equivalency, the equivalent thing is the sex scandal in the Catholic Church, and the realizing that feminism is kind of a hateful group that doesn't care in any way, shape, or form about men. And if 99% of men die in wars, not a concern, not important. You know, this was another thing that I saw some of the audience in your other interview recently kind of go crazy and say, or was it the beginning of this one? No, it was this one, yeah, where they said, you know, we need some background for these statistics. And Paul Elam, to his credit, said, you know, basically, you know, the statistics are accurate. There's nothing, you know, there's not a lot of explanation. Whereas the statistic that somebody else mentioned, which is 1 in 5 women is a victim of sexual assault, has been proved to be not factual. So this was another missed opportunity for you, is that never mention statistics when you're talking about one statistic. The statistics that's important is that 99% historically of American military deaths have been men, and that there is no real there's no way to dress it up. I mean, there's no pretty way to say it, you know. And again, what's missing in that is that if the audience, I'm going to stop saying feminist, if the audience that was watching your question and answer, if they were concerned with this, what they would do is think about what they would do. What's missing? What's missing is they would say, are you serious? 99% of deaths in the military have been men, and 95 in Iraq, but all in all, 99%. My goodness, we need to get women on the front lines. You know, and the reason is because it's not a blood thirst or anything like that. It's a realization that men are dying. I mean, the idea that I don't think people actually understand when men are dying. It's like, well, you can't kill women. Well, why not? I mean, men are dying. Men die. Men can be killed, right? It's like there's this total lack of connection. There's this lack of understanding of what's going on. You know, what is that? Men are dying for the country, and what would be a normal reaction would be like, this is outrageous. I mean, we talked about men in CEO positions. We've been focusing, like if a woman stood up in the middle of your thing and said, you know, we've been wasting all our time focused on men being CEOs and the percentage of men, and meanwhile, like, what's more important, money or your life? Right? I ask the audience right now, what's more important? Your wallet or your life? Which is more important? Okay, well, how about this? What's more important, your job or your life? Okay, so we're agreed that military deaths by far trump any kind of jobs that anybody has. And if we're going to try to create an equal balance of the sexes, the first thing we want to do is start to think of ways to take the burden off of men in the military. And I think there's several ways to do this, actually. I'm not a military guy myself, and I don't know, but I'm thinking like exoskeletons and things like that that allow guys to women to have the same strength as men, or maybe even more, to carry items to the front line, to run faster, you know, to fight longer and harder. You know, there's exoskeletons that are being created that could be used so that women could be on the front lines, and also in the areas where the attrition is the worst. You know, so in an effort to create a bit of fairness, there could be some products made specifically for women that allow them to go into the areas that currently are all men, and allow women to be in a situation where their lives are at risk, just like the men have, and to support to support their country. Like, freedom isn't free, you know. So I think along with that, we would have to have a lot of education, teaching boys that they've given enough, you know, like that you have done your share, you know, like in the boys in schools. Like, men have given their lives, our whole country, and now it's time for women to step up. And we are stepping up, us women. We are willing to go and do what you did. So for the, you know, the next whatever 100 years, we want women to be dying at least, you know, 70-80% rate to men. We'll never catch up, because 99% is impossible to catch up to, unless there was 100% women, which is obviously impossible. So, but I mean, we understand what you did for us. We understand, and we want to also give back, and we understand that freedom isn't free, that you need to support the values of the country, right? And that women are willing to do it. And that would be the kind of, and along with that would maybe be some kind of education, what do you call it, like education, what do you call it, drive, where families are telling their daughters, like, you know, how to use guns, and teaching them how to you know, camouflage, getting them, you know, GI Joes, getting young girls to understand what it takes to be a soldier, and also what it takes to support you know, the free society that we live in, right? So this would be the type of thing. I personally think that family pressure is one of the biggest reasons, and shame, why guys go and fight to their death. Hey, you know, they fight to the death because they are shamed into it. So a lot of my friends, for example, their parents, their father and their grandfather and their great-grandfather all fought in previous wars, and so they consider themselves a military family, and they died and fought. And the grandson, who would be my friend, feels a lot of pressure to do that, because, you know, this is what the family does, right? And I think this type of education for women would be a fantastic way to start, you know, is to teach women that, one, men have basically essentially allowed them to have the freedom that they have, and giving, you know, educating women on the sacrifices that men have made, and also the non-sacrifices that women have made, you know, as far as not sacrificing, and just taking, you know, having the benefit of what the men had done, right? So I think that's another essential point, that if this was a audience of caring individuals who were not essentially trauma shocked, you know, by your movie, this is the type of reaction I could see people having. Like, my gosh, this is totally unfair. Like, there's no reason why it should be this way. Men and women are the same. They can both, you know, we both live and die. We both have to work. We both have to eat. We have to go through situations. There's no reason why 99% of men protecting the country should be men. That people protecting the country should be men. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely mad. It's madness, right? And we should start to educate our daughters and about the responsibilities that they have as a member of a free society. This would be a normal kind of thing. We've seen this thing many times. Whenever society finds out there's an imbalance here and there, you know, they create these drives in education. It's attacked from many different angles, and people learn how to, you know, how to correct this imbalance, and also to kind of like correct the societal part of it, right? So people understand what's going on and what's right and what's wrong and who did what, you know. But none of this stuff is happening. There is an absolute, not only an unwillingness to change as far as getting women to join the military, or any kind of development of, like I said, like an exoskeleton or some kind of equipment that would help women to be strong enough to carry their gear 50 miles overnight, and to be able to be ready to fight in the morning. This is one of the main reasons why why military guys are not so excited about women on the front lines, is because they don't have the physical strength to do the things they need to do, right? But again, that is not what's going on. What we have is we have almost a disbelief. We have no thanks. We have no questions. We have no willingness to right wrongs, no willingness to admit fault, no gratitude for men, zero gratitude for what men have done, and almost like a just like a state of shock that this whole thing is even happening. I mean, what about feminism, right? You know what I mean? Like, what about feminism? What about me? What about that? You know, that's kind of like the reaction. It's like, oh yeah, well, 99% of men die. Yeah, well, you know, that could be worked on somewhere, but it's like, this is the essential thing. I mean, again, your money or your life, right? That's the question the thieves used to ask. And obviously the answer is your life, right? So let's start talking about our lives and our freedom, and correcting the imbalances that are going on. And if there is a way to do it, I'm not saying there is. Maybe exoskeletons are too far away, maybe they're too noisy, maybe it's impossible. But this is the type of thing that a rigorously honest audience would start to ask, is one, how can we thank people who did things for us in the past, and how can we make up for it? What can we do to improve things, and how can we make things balanced and fair? You know, if 99% of the CEOs are men, then of course women are wondering, why aren't there any women there? Now, that's not the case, but this is the case with the military. So I think your movie really brings up some very, very important points, and it's easy to get off track. And I would personally stop having women, feminists on the audience, question on the panel. It's just too much for them to absorb in the first hour. You can't expect them to watch the movie and to be able to change their whole life thinking, right? It's a process. Maybe you need to make some kind of a 6-month course that kids have to go through, just like we had feminist classes, you know, like and also there was feminism infiltrated all the other classes. But it's something that teaches what your movie discovered, the very, very important things that your movie discovered. So I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but I just feel like right now there's so many missed opportunities. But I want to end this on the key part, which is your movie blew my mind, and it is the clay with which anything else can happen. I think it's the most important movie for men in history, personally. And this can absolutely alter the way that we live our lives and the way that we think about ourselves. And I personally was blown away, even as a MGTOW, and you know, I've been a free man for my whole life. But seeing your movie and the way you presented it, it was just so touching, and so I couldn't deny it. I think a little bit of me was also in denial. But when I watched your movie, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like so serious. This is partly what made me really double down and make videos for Ronin Man channel, is I saw your movie. So I wanted you to know that it is was a very influential movie for me too. And I hope that more people see your movie. And it was just freaking awesome, Cassie. And thank you for everybody Milo, who helped to support it, whoever at Breitbart wrote that original article. You know, I used to go to, or I still go, but it's 12-step groups, and they always thank the Saturday Evening Post for writing a piece about them. And it's in the big books of AA that Jack Alexander of the Saturday Morning Post wrote an article that started to make AA explode with members, and they always give thanks to that. So I think that in this case, we should give thanks to Breitbart, however you pronounce it, for writing that original piece. And I think that women and men need to really think twice about that organization. You know, I think it would be very difficult, and this is another thing that's so difficult to accept it within an hour, is that the organization that you think is so evil and hatred, full of hatred, actually created was a supporter of one of the greatest humane movies of the 20th century. So it's a lot to think about, and it's a lot of like baggage that people have that they have to reevaluate in order to absorb your movie. So it's going to take time. It might take, you know, 10 years for your movie to really affect society. But I see this. I see it happening. I think you really let the cat out of the bag, and I personally am very, very grateful that you did that, and I appreciate you sticking with it, and you know, taking the hits that everybody took. You know, I mean, that you took from everybody. It's really inspirational, Cassie. So thank you very much, and I hope this was somewhat useful. This is a rambling talk. Either way, thanks for watching. Ronin Man signing off.